Good evening everybody, welcome back to the channel, and tonight I have another paid request from Kian, who's asked me to check this out. It's every country England has invaded, visualised. Okay, well, let's take a look at this. But before we get into it, don't expect me to be like, oh my god, we were so terrible, weren't we? I'm so ashamed of myself and my history and my country. I'm not going to be like that, because we had something called an empire, and the word invaded is, well, how should I put it? It's the easiest word for certain people to use when speaking about this kind of thing. But if you actually look deeper, you'll see that most of the things we actually did in those countries we went to doesn't really fall under the definition of invasion. But anyway, let's just get into it and see what he says. Remember, if you'd like to make a paid request, you can. We've got some sort of special offer on this month for them. What is it? 3 requests for the price of 2. So 3 requests for £4. And I'm also starting like a, you know, like you get a loyalty card in like Greg's or a takeaway. You get buy 6 somethings and you get a free one. I'm doing the same thing with requests. Make 6 requests and you get a free request. So yeah, that's what we've got going on.
This video is made possible by Curiosity Stream. Watch all of my videos early and ad-free, or watch my upcoming original series exclusively. Was the final boss through the bundled deal at curiositystream.com/reallifelore. For a good chunk of the past few centuries, this music was the final boss music played for people across the entire world. The English and later the British have been responsible for invading and conquering more countries and people than any other nation in human history. And honestly, it's startling just how many places they've been to. In this video, I'm going to do my best at attempting to visualize all of Britain's invasions and conquests for you, continent by continent, in as brief a time.
Quite rich, isn't it? An American saying that. Someone from a country that's bombing the shit out of pretty much every country in the Middle East.
As possible. So let's begin with the closest
And don't think just because you're an American citizen that doesn't work for the government that you're not responsible for it. You're paying for them bombs, so yeah.
continent to Britain, Europe. Ireland was the first target of British conquests and was invaded as early as 1169. Within 400 years of gradual conquests, the entire island was ruled by the British and remained that way until most of it was granted independence in 1921. Historically, France has probably been invaded by the English more times than any other country in the world. Just take a look at this huge list of invasions. There's not even enough time to talk about a third of these, and for a time, all of this.
Yeah, let's just can we meet on planet Earth for a second? Yeah. Most of those were during wars. You know, those things, wars where invasion is pretty much inevitable.
This territory inside of modern France was directly controlled by the English, with Calais being the final piece that fell in 1557. Well, except for that time when the British took over Corsica for a couple years.
That's ironic, isn't it? That's ironic considering what's going on right now with Calais involved.
Continue to invade Spain by the millions every winter, but in the past, they've come with a lot less friendly intentions. English and later British soldiers invaded under the Black Prince in 1367 and continued on through the first, second, third, and fourth raids on Cadiz and that time when the British took over Gibraltar and Minorca. They gave Minorca back, but decided on keeping Gibraltar forever. In recent history, the British have invaded Belgium in order to support the Belgians, but that wasn't always the case. They conducted 2 pretty large-scale invasions of modern-day Belgium in 1650.
See? War. If you invading a country during a war is perfectly fine.
And again in 1701.
You have to go into the country to fight the fucking country that you're at war with. Especially in them days. Didn't have interballistics to send in the fucking 12th century, did you?
And Flanders itself was ruled by the English for a few years in the 14th century. The Netherlands was one of England's historical arch-rivals, and so there's been plenty of invasions going in this direction across the 17th and 18th centuries. In 1940, the British technically invaded and took over Iceland peacefully for a year in order to prevent it from falling into the hands of the Germans. But this was heavily protested by the Icelandic government at the time, so in my books it still counts as an invasion.
By the government, not the people. Funny that, isn't it? And in his book, it also so these invasions that he's talking about in this video, they're the ones that count as invasions in his book, right? I get it now.
Italy, of course, was invaded by the British Army during the Second World War as well in 1943, but there were plenty of invasions before then, dating back to
War. Yeah.
Richard the Lionheart's invasion in 1190. Germany, too, was obviously invaded by the British Army in 1945, and northwestern Germany was occupied by the British for 3 years until 1948.
Interesting, he points out how it's obvious that we invaded Germany during that time in the aftermath of a war, but he doesn't mention every other example he's given was during a war also.
A lot of German territory was ruled by Britain long before then. The islands of Heligoland were British for most of the 19th century, and the Kingdom of Hanover was effectively ruled under a personal union for over a century between 1714 and 1837. Austria was also invaded in 1945, and the southwest of the country was occupied for a decade. Norway was invaded in 1810 and 1812 during the Napoleonic Wars when it was a part of Denmark-Norway because Denmark was aligned to France, so obviously Denmark was invaded during that time as well. Finland, Estonia, and Latvia were all briefly invaded by small units during the Crimean War against Russia because they were all part of the Russian Empire at the time, and of course, Russia itself was invaded then too, as well as in 1918 when the British took over a large chunk of northern Russia.
I'm sorry. When you're including Russia in any context to do with invasion or whatever, it's just like, look at the fucking size of it. You know? Nobody could conquer Russia if they tried. It's just massive. And they have every single possible climate there. I think the only thing they don't have in Russia is a proper rainforest. Or a desert. But everything else they have. You couldn't if you tried. There would always be at least a part of the country where it's, you know, still... Yeah. But again, I bet it'll be during some type of war.
For a time in their fight against the Bolsheviks. The territory of modern Ukraine was invaded by British army units during the Crimean War. The British took over the Croatian island of Vis between 1807 and 1814 during their fight against Napoleon. The British army had boots and guns on the ground in Bosnia recently between 1992 and 95, fighting against the Bosnian Serbs, and around the same time, the RAF also carried out bombing strikes against Serbian Serb targets in Serbia in 1999. Montenegro was briefly blockaded.
Again, that was during a war, wasn't it? There was a war going on in that part of Europe. I can't remember the name of it, but there was definitely some kind of war going on in like Serbia and that area at some point in the late 20th century. Is that what this video is? Is he's just gonna like use every time we've gone to a country as part of a war effort during a war and call it an invasion? Because if it is, then, well, I can't possibly guess, can I? Because I haven't seen the whole video. But yeah, this is pathetic. When's he going to make a video on the Vikings? Or has he done one on the Vikings? Or literally any other country that's been at war with somewhere else, and does he class that as an invasion? Or does he just say, oh, well, they had to do that as part of their war? No, because it's us. Because we're Britain and we were the most powerful country for however many 100 years. It's an invasion when we do it. Yeah. Thought so.
And invaded in 1913 during the First Balkan War. The British owned the westernmost Ionian islands of Greece between 1815 and 1863 before they gave them back, while Bulgaria was invaded and almost entirely occupied by the British Army between 1918 and 1919 at the end of World War I. Cyprus was a British protectorate between 1878 and 1914 when they decided to just outright annex it to piss off the Turks, and it remained annexed until 1960, except for two small chunks that are still British today. Turkey itself was massively invaded by the British during World War I, and part of it was occupied between 1919 and 1923.
Oh my god, again, during a war! It's a fucking World War I! How can you... Oh my god. And I can just tell by this guy's voice the sort of person he is. Oh.
That wraps up Europe, so let's move on to Asia next.
I'm not fucking paying him for this shit either. No chance. By the way, that's a little trick you can do so that you don't have to watch ads. Just block them. And it'll stop.
Next, modern-day Israel and Palestine, as well as Jordan, were British-controlled from the...
If there's any YouTubers that you're watching with ads on their videos that you don't like, and you get an ad, and you're like, I don't want to pay this person a penny, just do that.
end of World War I to 1948 and 1946, respectively. Lebanon and Syria were both occupied from the Vichy French government briefly during World War II. Iraq was ruled between 1919 and 1932 and invaded again during the Second World War, and again in 1991, and again in 2003.
Alright, fair enough. Yeah, right, the 2003 thing, right? We all know why that happened, don't we? Why anything happened in Iraq in 2003. First of all, America started that. They started that as retaliation for 9/11, and they dragged us into it. Now, I do agree that what resulted in the almost 20 years after that was over oil more than anything else. That's the only one I'm going to give this prick so far. I agree. If America wanted to retaliate against any of these countries that were involved with 9/11, they should have just bombed a government building or something. Similar to, you know, like, so Israel, it's just bombed the Iranian embassy. For me, that's, in my opinion, that's how war should work, or things to do with wars. The only things that should be getting bombed or attacked are government buildings or military bases. Nowhere where just normal people like me and you are living. But anyway, they should have done that. What were I going to say though? Yeah, so I'm going to agree with Iraq. We never should have been there. It had nothing to do with us in the first place. World Trade Center is on the other side of the fucking world. Not to do with us. We didn't build them, we didn't pay for them. I mean, yeah, America are our closest allies and whatever, but still. But yeah, that I just wanted to say that. Iraq, I'll sort of agree with, and Afghanistan. We should never have been there. They were never a threat to us or America. They didn't have any nuclear weapons. They didn't have an air force. But now that us and America have left Afghanistan, we've left all our military equipment there, so now they do. It wouldn't surprise me if that were the plan all along. Pretend to have a war with them for however many years and just leave them all our equipment. Arm them. And, well, whatever they want to do with that. That's all these governments nowadays, that's all they want to do. They just want to cause conflict. Mind you. In fact, World War III is right around the corner. You can't say it's not. Maybe that's why they did it. To make sure that they had something to fight this new war that's about to start. Because Iraq's going to get involved with this whole thing going on around here, eventually. All the countries around here will, at some point. They'll all be involved. But yeah, Iraq. We should never have been there. And you look at how many soldiers died during anything to do with that place or Afghanistan. It were all for nothing. What did we achieve? Also, I know that it was a bullshit war, because how the hell did the combined forces of us, America, Germany, France, and all the other European allies that went there with us, how didn't we beat them? I mean, I used to watch documentaries of soldiers in Afghanistan, and they used to go out on patrol and you used to see them having firefights, and the people that they were fighting against, it were literally just some, you know, Afghan fella dressed in, you know, the long, like, one-piece clothing that people in that part of the world wear. Just in that, carrying an AK, he'll jump behind something, hide behind it, fire a few times, and he'll get on a motorbike and fuck off. And that were basically the Afghan army. And we couldn't beat them in, what, Nearly 20 years? Yeah, it were all bullshit. Anyway, I'm just saying my piece on that. We didn't belong there, and we've just pissed them off. You were in the news last night. Apparently, the next ISIS attack is imminent. Imminent. It's going to be very soon. MI5 are on high alert, apparently. They're going to start putting armed guards outside stadiums and shopping centres again, all around the country. So, yeah. Well done, government. Another great job you did for the people who pay your fucking wages. Yeah, great job.
Kuwait was a colony for over 60 years until 1966. Georgia and Azerbaijan were both invaded and occupied right at the end of World War I for a year. Iran has been invaded at least 3 times, with the most notable example being the joint Anglo-Soviet invasion of 1941. Turkmenistan was invaded in 1918 to prevent Bolshevik influence from spreading any further. Afghanistan is a favorite British invasion spot since it's been invaded in 1839, 1878, 1919, and again in 2001. Qatar, Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, and Oman were all controlled by the British until the early 1970s.
Oh yeah, because the United Arab Emirates are really struggling now, aren't they? They haven't recovered from when whatever we did while we were there happened. They're really struggling, aren't they? They haven't got a pot to piss in. Because it's not downtown Dubai that basically everyone drives around the streets in a fucking Ferrari, is it? It's London and Manchester.
While a chunk of Yemen was controlled for over a century between 1839 and 1967.
This area here, you know, the UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, not these places, these countries are still struggling, and Saudi Arabia, the majority of anything to do with money in this world benefits these 4 countries. They're fucking rolling in dough in this area. They're laughing, absolutely laughing. But the one thing that worries me is when I don't believe all the climate change hysteria and all that bullshit, but it is what's the word? The idea that we could run out of oil one day. If that does happen, what are these countries then going to do? Because it's the only industry that they've got, really. That's why they're so rich. So when all those countries in the West stop buying oil off them and they've got no money to make, what happens then? You know? That's quite worrying. Someone said that the other day as well. I saw someone talking about it and they said all this money that they've made from selling oil to everybody, all the weapons that they've bought with the money they've made, what are they going to do when they've no money coming in? You know? Which, you know, I'm not voicing an opinion on it, I'm just making the point that once that cash cow dies off, it's going to be interesting.
India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka were all, of course, invaded many times and outright ruled by the British Empire in parts for nearly 2 centuries between 1757 and 1947. Nepal was invaded in 1814 but never successfully conquered. Bhutan was invaded in 1772 and again in 1864 and was sort of...
Right, I'm not going to give any opinion on India because it's a very controversial topic. In fact, yeah, definitely not. Or, no, yeah, no. I'm not going to say anything about this. I could, but I won't, because there's a lot, you know, going on in the world right now. And, yeah. I'm not saying anything about this subject.
Of conquered as a protectorate between 1910 and 1948. Burma/Myanmar was invaded in 1826 and was definitely successfully conquered and ruled through 1947. Thailand was briefly invaded in 1945 since they were allied to Japan in World War II, and so was Vietnam in the same year, but that was to support the French government against the growing...
Communist. Burma's full of landmines. Kids getting blown up every time they go play football in the countryside. And Vietnam is doing alright. You know, Burma had a revolution. And had a communist government that's just it's awful. Vietnam, they're actually doing okay. Quite a rich country.
Independence movement. Malaysia and Singapore were each conquered and ruled up until the 1950s and 1960s. Brunei was conquered and ruled up until the 1980s, whereas the Philippines were briefly invaded during...
Brunei is one of the richest countries in the world. In fact, the Sultan of Brunei's son is contracted to a Premier League club. Is it Leicester City? He's the richest footballer in the world. Forget Messi, Ronaldo, Beckham. He's the richest footballer in the world, but he never plays. Because he's not that good. He's not good enough. But he was under contract at Leicester City at one point when they were in the Premier League.
During the 7 Years' War, China got invaded a lot, and Hong Kong was a colony until as recently as 1997. And while not outright invaded, part of Japan was occupied following World War II between 1946 and 1952. And finally, Indonesia was invaded a bunch...
Is this guy forgetting what Japan was?
During the Napoleonic Wars, since it was a Dutch colony aligned to France at the time. Next up, Oceania. Australia and New Zealand, of course, were invaded by
Oceania.
the British and established as colonies that each gained independence in 1931. Papua New Guinea was also a British colony for a time, as were the island countries of Fiji, Kiribati, the Solomon Islands, Tuvalu, and Vanuatu. Let's move back over to Africa next, which the British have violently visited a lot. In terms of just places the British outright colonized...
I've already said something about this in a recent video. About the African countries that we went to. The ones that we still have some kind of power over are like the developing countries that are doing okay. The ones that we've left are the ones that now have the ridiculous tin pot dictators that are taking every penny and buying Ferraris and stuff while their people starve, or they're at war, or they're a communist dictatorship, or some kind of problem. So, yeah, all of this is about to say. I'm not going to go into it either, because again, if I did, you know what would happen. But well, I'm not agreeing with anything you said, to be honest, but this in particular, let's just say I know where he's getting his information from, or what sources. It's obvious.
After invasions, there's the Gambia, Sierra Leone, Ghana, Nigeria, Egypt, Sudan, South Sudan, Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, Zambia, Malawi, Zimbabwe, Botswana, Namibia, and South Africa, along with parts of modern-day Somalia and Guinea. Senegal was briefly invaded and had some of their coastline taken over in the 1700s, while during the Second World War, the British invaded the French colonies of Djibouti, Madagascar, and Comoros after they aligned themselves with the Nazi Vichy regime, and the Italian colonies of Libya, Eritrea...
Oh, we invaded them after they aligned themselves with the Nazis. Oh, we're so awful.
and Ethiopia, although they had also invaded Ethiopia much earlier in 1868.
Who is this guy talking? Is he on Twitter? The guy that makes this video? Got a few things I'd love to say to this prick.
And as German colonies right before World War I, the British also invaded Togo.
And I know someone's going to say, well, it's not like he's, dedicated any length of time of this video to saying that what we did in these countries was terrible and all that. It doesn't matter. The entire context of this video is saying it anyway. It's saying invaded. And you can just tell the tone in his voice, the way he's describing it, if it's, violently invaded Africa or whatever he said. So he doesn't have to say that. Because it's obvious what, tone he means this video to have. It's obvious to me, clear to me. Whenever someone talks about it, it's always the same. So, yeah. I know, I've got this guy locked. I know exactly what he's saying. And it's just doing that thing again.
And as German colonies right before World War I, the British also invaded Togo and Cameroon without annexing them afterwards. For the final area of the world left to discuss, let's move over to the Americas. All of Canada was a British colony until 1931, while Newfoundland remained until 1949. The United States, of course, was a colony until 1776, and was invaded again in 1812, and the modern states of Oregon and Washington were claimed right up until 1846. As far as other outright British colonies here go, there was the Bahamas, Jamaica, Belize, Grenada, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Barbados, St. Lucia, Dominica, Antigua and Barbuda, St. Kitts and Nevis, Trinidad and Tobago, and Guyana. Besides colonies, Cuba was invaded and occupied during the 7 Years' War in 1762. Haiti was invaded in 1793 during the French Revolutionary Wars. The Dominican Republic was invaded way back in 1655 in an attempt at conquest under Oliver Cromwell. Parts of the east coast of Honduras and Nicaragua were conquered and ruled for nearly 2 centuries until 1819. They sent the Navy to invade Mexico in 1861 to force them to repay some debts, and during the splendidly named War of Jenkins Ear, aka the more lame-sounding War of the Austrian Succession, the British invaded a lot of Spain's colonies, including Panama, a huge one into Colombia, and ultimately Peru. In 1796, the British took over Suriname because it was a Dutch colony, and they were allied.
Suriname. So not only is he what I've already said, but he can't speak properly either. Doesn't know how to say words. Why did you request this video, Kian? Is it because it was you that requested the thingy video, wasn't it? The bad drivers video? And the way I reacted to that, you know. Is it because you knew this would have a similar effect? Oh dear.
With the revolutionary French and later Napoleon. They also invaded Martinique and Guadeloupe because they actually were French during the Napoleonic Wars. Venezuela was invaded in 1902 as part of the so-called
Really? We invaded a country in South America that belonged to France during the Napoleonic Wars? Wow, right. Okay. Who'd have thought we'd ever do that? Because it's... no other country's done that during a war, have they? Invaded a country that's not part of the country that they're fighting against, but is one of their territories, to gain the upper hand in the war. No one's ever done that before, have they? No.
Venezuela crisis to force wars. Venezuela was invaded in 1902 as part of the so-called Venezuela crisis to force the country to repay some debts they had defaulted on, kind of like Mexico, while Argentina and Uruguay were both invaded during the Napoleonic Wars as well in 1806 when Spain and her colonies were still allied with Napoleon.
Yeah.
And that pretty much sums up all of the territory the British have ever ruled and all of the countries the small island has ever invaded. There are a total of 65 countries today who celebrate their independence days from the British Empire. The Empire used to rule over a quarter of all the world's land at the same time and was the biggest empire in human history. And in total, today, there have been 117 modern countries that have been aggressively invaded by the British Armed Forces during some point in their histories, representing a total of 60% of all the world's nations, which is almost the same number of countries that you can watch this video in. YouTube is available in 130 countries now, or about 2/3 of them, but
and this is where he tries making his money. Yeah, the rest of the video is just him saying, give me money, or, you know, use my code to get something at a slightly discounted price, because I've got a sponsor now. Yeah, you know, this is the problem as well. Another problem as well about videos like this. I can't even begin to go into it because I'd just get banned. My channel would get shut down unless I agree with this guy outright, which is what, you know. Hold on. I need to put them on YouTube so I can delete that. Yeah. Yeah. violently. That's the context he meant this in. But all I'll say about it is, when you're reading about British history, just be mindful of the sources that you're getting it from, because, you know, we've got the BBC right now. When they're making a TV show, I mean today in 2024, when they're making a TV show that's set in a bygone era, they're portraying people like Isaac Newton and, you know, major historical figures from the history of this country as non-white or from this country and that country, when it's clearly documented that they weren't. You know, so much of our history has been edited, changed, adjusted to fit this narrative and that narrative to make this tribe happy, that tribe happy, that you can't be sure that you're getting the correct account at all now. I mean, people, you know, some people, they'll go, oh, well, I read it on Wikipedia, so it's definitely true. Wikipedia can be edited by literally anyone. I can log into Wikipedia right now and change anything I want about human history, so that and in the next hour, 10,000 people might read what I've written and believe that's the truth. So, yeah, didn't like this video. If I'm being honest, I hated it, because it's just more hating of us, or we're the most evil people in history because we went to a few countries and, you know, installed a government and brought order to some of the... Seriously, read the history. Just be careful of the sources, because, as I say, most of them just say, oh, we just went around killing people and took all the people's money and blah blah blah. We didn't. That is not true at all. Whenever something like this comes up, I just say the same thing. If it wasn't for us, the modern world wouldn't exist. Right? Seriously. I mean, I just hate people like this and content like this. It's always our fault. And we never ever get thanks or recognition for everything that we did do that, you know. We ended slavery. We, Great Britain, ended the African slave trade. And the money that we paid the slave traders in Africa and America to stop doing it, British taxpayers didn't stop paying that off until about 2019. So, you know, all this bullshit about why you do, you know, even though it happened all this time ago, this generation is still at fault for it because you're living in a country that benefited from, that's rich now because it did that back in those days. But the people living in this country, and, you know, they were still paying for your people's freedom up until a few years ago. But you're blaming them for it. You know, seriously, just be careful where you're getting this information from, because so much of it has been completely subverted, and yeah, I can't think of every single one, but if you want to learn a bit of history, don't get it from the BBC, don't get it from the National Geographic, don't get it from Wikipedia, don't get it from any of the mainstream TV channels. So Sky have a documentary channel, don't they? It's like Sky Nature, Sky History, things like that. Don't get it from any of them. Your best place is books. Books, and I don't mean recent books. If you can, just get the books, the old books, that were printed 50 years ago, or even further back, if you can. Because they're the most accurate. As long as the book wasn't printed in this century, you should be okay. You should get a pretty accurate account of what it is you want to learn about. But anything beyond that, I'd be careful. Maybe up until about 2005 you're alright. Depending on what it is. But yeah, just to be careful, don't get any book from this century. But yeah, he's asked me to do this and I've done it, so there you go. God. I'm going to dislike it. It's not going to do anything, but yeah, it's just my way of saying to this guy that's made it. So yeah. That was every country England has invaded. Visualised. I could talk about this for a lot longer, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to end the video. So, thanks for the request, Kian. And as I said, if you want to request a video, go ahead. And I was planning on coming up with a few series, like sitcoms from other countries, and putting them in a poll maybe, but I don't know if I'm going to do that. Because I think everything that I'm doing right now, it's all British and English sitcoms and comedies. And when I look at the Pentatonics videos, how many of the people watching those are from America, I think maybe in other countries, you know, I want to look into that. So I might put some posts up asking people about their favourite sitcoms in their countries and whatever, but I need to think about it. So I'm going to look at the countries and where most of them are from, and then, yeah. But we'll see how that goes. And there's also... We've nearly finished the young ones. So, something to do with, related to that, is going to happen after we finished it, I think. But I don't know yet. I need to think about that, actually, so, no, ignore that. Yeah, I'll just end it there. So, yeah, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.